I believe in human rights, just the same way you believe in human rights. I believe in fundamental rights and freedoms, core values that bind the entire human race together, and which form the only and truly universal language on earth. We all fundamentally have the same belief in this respect, right? We all want human rights. We all want to be treated equally. We all want the right to education, the right to healthcare, the right to an identity, the right to be treated fairly by the system, by everyone, regardless of our belief, religion, and creed, lifestyle, social background, regardless of. More importantly, what we want is to be treated with empathy. That's what we want. That's what you want. And that's how civilization evolved over time. We codify and institutionalize these rights into our laws to ensure it's protected, right? But the sad reality is, and just going to throw this out there for everyone to think about, yeah? Too often, we see situations where these rights that are protected by the system, by law, by our institutions, are really the rights of the majority. Which really means we believe in our own rights, but not so much the rights of others. Maybe, just maybe, we need to realize and recognize this. When the rights of others, and you think about it, when the rights of others are impinged and oppressed, oftentimes we willfully neglect it, or we create institutions that oppresses the right of the marginalized. And when I say we, I'm talking about the majority who are in one category that shares the same interests and same beliefs. And take for example, and there's so many examples out there by the way, but take for example, and if we go back in history, right, the systematic oppression of the rights of the minority under Nazi Germany before and during World War II, all right? The persecution of Jews, people of different color and race. Or the decades of apartheid in South Africa before it was abolished, mid-90s. Or something closer to home, the rights of the LGBTQ. We have a system here that criminalizes their right to live as they choose. The right of a transsexual to wear women's clothes, for example, or to behave and live as the opposite sex. Now, you may not like who they are or how they live their lives because of things like religion or culture, but maybe it's because, and think about it, maybe it's because we're in the majority and many of us don't really care, or we do care but couldn't be bothered to do anything about it, or be vocal about it, or we just rather follow the majority's will because we're part of the same herd, right? Might as well just join the bandwagon, because why bother about the rights of the marginalized? Our human rights are protected by the system anyways, right? We've got a federal constitution to that effect. Well, how do I respond to that? What I just said. Well, how do we, those who have empathy for the plight of the marginalized, how do we respond to that? Well, I believe that the best way for me to make, if I'm going to attempt to make a compelling statement, yeah, is to steal the prophetic words of a victim, of which I am not. A German pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller. This is before and during World War II, where he spoke about the cowardice of German intellectuals and even himself. This is what he said in the form of a poem translated to English, and it went like this. First, they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now, let the words of Martin Niemöller sink in for just a second before I speak about the human rights realities in Sabah. It really is about the majority, isn't it? Or the might of the elite. But being silent when the human rights of the minority or the marginalized are impinged, that's a dangerous path to walk, because what happens when our rights, our own rights, are impinged? Who's going to speak for us? Now I'm gonna just for a moment pause my rhetorics and bring the focus back to our own backyard, yeah, Sabah, right here. When we're talking about human rights issues in Sabah, the biggest one is the human rights of stateless people. And I'm not talking about those who are, temporarily stateless because of the late registration by the Malaysian parents, not that. I'm talking about something that's much larger, something that's very Sabah-centric, very far-reaching, that affects the very core of our values, a very uniquely Sabahan problem. I'm talking about the human rights of the stateless people who are descendants of Filipino refugees that migrated during the 70s onwards, or the children of illegal immigrants who are born here over many generations. Now, before I dive straight into it, let me say this. I will not be naive and say that there is no political element to this social problem. However, my goal here today is more about showing you the other side of the coin and hopefully give you a different perspective as far as my attempt to humanize the social problem. And perhaps, if I'm lucky enough, maybe, just maybe, engineer pop culture. Now, to truly appreciate this phenomenon in Sabah and why it's so unique in so many angles, we need to go back to the early 70s and really understand what caused this social problem. At that time, there was a large-scale insurgency in Mindanao, which caused a huge displacement of Southern Muslim Filipinos. So what happens afterwards was this forced about 100,000 people to escape to Sabah because of the geographical proximity. And this group of people were recognized as refugees by United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee. But interestingly, Malaysia has never recognized them as refugees. Why? Well, our country is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, right? And we do not have an asylum system here. So what Malaysia did instead was to issue them a special pass called IMM 13. This pass allows them to stay and work in Sabah. So that's the genesis of the huge influx of migrants beginning in the 70s. Now, and mind you, this migration was not a one-off event and continued till well over the decades. And then over the years, the government also issued 2 other special passes, which pretty much has the same effect as the IMM 13 special pass I mentioned earlier, right? Now, here comes the problem. The problem flowing from this is the incredible population growth in Sabah in a very short span of time, which is fundamentally caused by an incredibly high number of special pass holders and eventual stateless people. The problem with this is the descendants of these refugees, for the lack of better words, multiply significantly. Initially, the children of these special pass holders could benefit from the special pass. So in a way, the children can legally stay in Sabah back then. But over the years, Malaysia then changed its policy whereby children of these special pass holders cannot rely on their parents' special pass to legally stay. These children then had children of their own, and as a result, we're talking about 3 to 4 generations, maybe even more, of descendants who became undocumented and then afterwards stateless. Now let's look at official statistics to just to get a better perspective of the issue. Official population Sabah 2015, all right, 3.5 million. And out of this 3.5 million, about 870,000 are non-citizens. That's almost a third of Sabah's population, all right, which is also literally 44% of Malaysia's foreign workers. And I cannot emphasize this enough, such official statistics, you have to take it with a pinch of salt because it doesn't include Sabah's illegal immigrants and their incredibly high dependents, right? For example, their children, who are born here, by the way. Now, here's where it gets quite interesting. Clearly, these people have become undocumented because of the change of government policies over the years. In Malaysia, politically, legally, we do not recognize the concept of statelessness. Instead, our system calls all of them undocumented migrants, which to me doesn't really make a lot of sense because thousands of them are not migrants, they are born here. And we're talking about 3 to 4, maybe even more, right, generations of stateless people. That means we can't deport them. Unfortunately, right, our system marginalizes them. And this is one of the major factors that drove me to create public awareness about their plight. And I want to emphasize one thing though. When I'm talking about this issue, it's important for us to note that there is a huge difference between a stateless person and an illegal immigrant. Oftentimes, the public lump both groups into one category. That's wrong. Stateless people in Sabah are born here, but do not have legal status, yeah? Illegal immigrants, on the other hand, are born in their own country of origin, and we can have their citizenship traced back. They just choose to illegally enter our borders. That's pretty much it. But regardless, I've always strongly believed that when we're talking about statelessness, that context, especially the problem in Sabah, creating public awareness to the social problem is absolutely crucial. The public's perception towards stateless people needs to change first before we can even start thinking about making institutional changes. Sadly though, many Sabahans have demonized stateless people. The locals, in particular the major indigenous groups in Sabah, became worried that they'll be outnumbered and that this large number of stateless people will eventually be in control, which was manipulated further by unscrupulous politicians who played into that fear and wrongly labeled all of them PTI, pendatang tanpa izin, even though they are born here. That's the narrative that many Sabahans follow. And I can understand why they think so. Because of this though, the stateless community became subject to an increasingly xenophobic treatment towards them as a community. But here's where it gets very hypocritical. Even though a lot of us look at them as pariahs and we dehumanize them and all those things, we still rely on them heavily to do the jobs we don't want to do. And sadly, because of this, the Sabahan public generally stigmatizes them. And yet, we still can't live without them. You know what I mean? In a way, you can describe this strange relationship as a system of mutual illegal collaboration between us as employers and them as employees who are undocumented and stateless, which, whether we like it or not, is hypocrisy at the highest level, because we rely on them to do the low-paid, unskilled jobs that we absolutely hate, but we refuse to give them the same basic human rights that we all take for granted. It's morally reprehensible, right? Think about it. Morally reprehensible to use them for our own economic benefit, but in return we don't give them any basic human rights. We need to create a pop culture by educating the public on the larger issues and implications of not acknowledging that stateless people, who are very much part of the social and economic fabric of Sabah, that they have basic fundamental rights. We need that as a platform in order for us to move forward and resolve this social problem once and for all by implementing the right institutions and legal framework. One of my favorite movies of all time is American History X, especially the ending scene where I learned that it's always good to end a proposition with a quote. And I've used this style in my line of work on numerous occasions, okay? Because I figured if someone else has already said it best and you can't say anything better, you might as well just steal it from them, go out strong, right? So this is a quote, and I'm stealing it from Abraham Lincoln, okay? We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend.